Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Catalyst One webinar about CSRD for HR. So my name is Hope, and I am head of marketing here at Catalyst One, and I will be your host today. I have invited Christina, director at Deloitte Norway, and an expert on human rights and social sustainability, to give us an introduction to the CSRD from an HR perspective. Welcome, Christina. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So before I hand it over to you, Christina, let's just have a very brief look at what we're going to talk about today. So now, 5 years after GDPR was rolled out, we have another EU directive coming our way that HR really needs to be focused on. The CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It may seem frustrating that we have new and demanding reporting requirements that we need to take care of, but the overall objective is truly important and necessary. So the CSRD's primary objective is to improve consistency and reliability of sustainability information provided by companies operating in the EU. And why is this so important? Because transparency will help eradicate greenwashing and make it easier for both investors and consumers to make intentional and sustainable investment choices. So what exactly does all this mean for HR? That is exactly what we're going to look into over the next 50 minutes or so in this webinar. So you really are in for a treat when Christina starts her presentation. So before we start, I just want to remind all of you that you have the little question and answers box on your screen. So please use it, input all your questions, and we will make time for a Q&A towards the end of the webinar. And with that, I will give the floor to Christina.
Thank you. So hopefully you can see my screen share now. I hope you can give me a quick notice if it falls out. Excellent.
It's great.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. And I'm really, really pleased to be here today to talk about a subject that is close to my heart and also to an audience, which is, I think at the core of this topic, which is social sustainability. My name is Christina Avenkron. I'm a director at Deloitte Norway, and I lead our services here related to social sustainability and sustainable supply chains. And within that, I also advise a number of clients on regulatory requirements and also on specifically for those of you here in Norway, we advise a lot of clients on the Transparency Act, the Åpenhetsloven, which is also quite closely interlinked to this. And now I say social sustainability, and you might think, I signed up for a webinar on CSRD, but don't worry, I'm also planning to talk to you about the CSRD. But when we do that for HR, it is social sustainability, which is at the core of what we're talking about. So I will just, hopefully I can switch to the next one. So these are the key elements that I want to run through with you today. I will start just with the umbrella of social sustainability, just to give you some context of what this is about and also to make it a bit familiar to topics that you are already working on and which is already a part of your responsibilities. Then I will give you a basic introduction to the CSRD. What is this directive and what are the requirements that it puts on to businesses across Europe? The timeline, the technicalities, a bit, some basic information on that. And then we will dig some deeper into the most HR-related requirements in the CSRD. There are obviously a number of requirements here that are not that relevant to HR, but we will focus mostly on those that are today. And then I have a few key messages that I want to leave you with at the end of the presentation before we go to the Q&A session. And as Hope said, please just write your questions in the chat box along, and we will take them all at the end of the presentation. So, social sustainability. You have all seen these three letters, I guess, and I will dig a bit more deeper into them a bit later. But ESG is a common term to describe the topics that are now known to make up the sustainability agenda. And traditionally, it is the environmental side that it has the most focus when we're talking about sustainability. With all these new regulations, sustainability is a wider term, and it also includes social and governance topics. So the social sustainability is the S in ESG. And I've included this one just because when you look at these topics and when you look at these the list of topics under social, I'm quite sure that will kind of comfort you because these are topics that you will already be very familiar with. It is about labor rights, it's about equal opportunities, it's about health and safety, working conditions, etc. So this is just to give you a notion of the social dimensions of sustainability, which is relevant to you. So what is social sustainability? Social sustainability is about identifying and managing the impacts that a business has, both positive and negative, on people and society. So when we're talking about social sustainability, it is people and society and how a business impacts its surroundings that we're talking about. And as you know, businesses can have impact not only within its own operations, but also across the entire value chain, from the sourcing of raw materials and the production of raw materials and all the way throughout to the community and the end users of its products or services. So when you're talking about social sustainability, you manage and you identify and manage these impacts, both the positive and the negative ones, across this entire value chain. And I'm sure that even though you as HR functions are mostly concerned with the employee dimension here, I'm sure you're also involved in a number of processes that also touch upon the other parts of the value chain. And the CSRD also mirrors this, that it has an entire value chain scope, so to say. And that is on all topics, not only the social topics, but also the total of the ESG topics. So please keep in mind when you're working on this that it's about the impacts that you have across the value chain, not only within your own operations. But moving forward from here, I will mainly focus on what concerns the own operations of a business, because that is where HR is at its core. So, some basic information about the CSRD. Well, I wanted to start here, because already in these introductory minutes, I've listed quite a few abbreviations or acronyms in my presentation. And many of you might think, CSRD might be connected to CSR, which is the term that we have traditionally used to describe corporate social responsibility, which is what these letters stand for. It is not that widely used anymore. It has been replaced mostly by these other abbreviations, ESG, for instance. But I wanted to just give you, why is CSR a bit different from what we're talking about now. CSR has traditionally been, as I said, the corporate social responsibility, but the challenges or the difference between that and what is now coming is that has mostly been voluntary, where the businesses themselves can can choose what kind of social responsibility they want to put forward or how they want to manage it. And in many cases, it has not been directly linked to the core activities of the business. So maybe it has been sponsoring the local football team, or it could also be more closely related to the core business. But when we're talking about ESG and CSRD, it is always now connected to the core of the business. So CSR, so corporate social responsibility, has been most, I would say, now we're not talking so much about that, we're talking about ESG. And ESG traditionally came from the reporting universe, where it describes topics that were interesting for investors and other stakeholders to get information about from a business. So, but today we're using these letters as a common abbreviation, or as a common term to describe what we're now seeing as sustainability, the topics that comprise sustainability. And quite simply, it just says, what are the topics we're talking about? The E is for environment, the S is about social, and the G is about governance. And the reason for that is that not only is the aim of sustainability to get to a green transition and to a more sustainable future in terms of climate emissions reductions or pollution reductions, but it has to happen in a fair and just way. And it also has to happen in a way where which is lawful and ethical and which is transparent. So the S and the G represents a common notion that it is not enough for us to have a environmentally sustainable future. We need to have it in a just and fair and transparent way. So ESG is pretty much the abbreviation of the topics that we're talking about here. Then we're moving on to the letters that we're mostly talking about today. The CSRD stands for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And that is a directive coming from the EU, and it lays out a lot of reporting requirements when it comes to sustainability matters for companies throughout Europe. You will hear in relation to this about the ESRS. The CSRD is the directive itself. It sets the boundaries and the basic requirements for who should report, how often, what kind of assurance shall it be, etc. That is the directive itself. That is the regulation. The ESRS are the reporting standards. So the ESRS are where the detailed requirements lie. And those are prepared by a working group, which is called the EFRAG. And that is a working group who has worked systematically over several years to develop these reporting criteria. And the ESRS are now it's the standard set of reporting requirements that you're supposed to disclose under the CSRD. So the CSRD and the ESRS are the most important abbreviations, or the most important terms for you to remember. So let me see if it will switch. I also included this slide, not to confuse you, maybe it will, but you will meet a lot of other abbreviations and letters and acronyms when working in this field. And most of them I will not dig deeper into today. I will just highlight to you that you might also come across these terms that are highlighted in green here, the UNGPs, the CSRD, and HRDD. These are all concerned with human rights risk management. So the CSRD is the European equivalent to the Norwegian Transparency Act, you could say, in very simplified terms. which requires companies to do due diligence of their own operations, supply chains, and value chains when it comes to negative impacts on people and society. And in European, in the CSRD, it also includes environment. So these are also relevant to HR because they concern human rights and they concern human rights related topics. But I will not dig more into them now. But just keep that in mind if you see them, that they are related to that. And also that the CSRD is also part of the regulatory package that is coming from the EU. So let me see, did I skip one? No. Okay. So the CSRD at a glance. The CSRD, as I said, stands for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And it has already entered into force, actually, and it's a new regulation that is in much more detail than previous regulations on sustainability reporting, sets out requirements on to businesses on what they should report on when it comes to sustainability matters. It comprises of 12 standards and an extensive number of reporting requirements. And it relies on a double materiality assessment. I will get back to that later. There are 4 sets, you could say, of standards. There are the cross-cutting standards, which are the ESRS 1 and 2. Those are mandatory for all. So they are general and they are not sector-specific or topic-specific, but they set some general requirements on reporting that applies to all companies who are subject to the CSRD. Then there are the topical standards, which are the E, the S, and the G. And those are all reliant on a double materiality assessment, which I will come back to. But they comprise of different topics with different reporting requirements. So on environment, for instance, you have climate change, pollution, water, marine resources, biodiversity, and resource use and circular economy. On governance, you have topics related to business conduct. And then the social one, which is the one that is most relevant to you and that we will dig a bit more into, concerns requirements about your reporting requirements on your own employees, workers in the value chain, affected communities, and consumers and end users. I will focus mostly on the ESRS as one, which concerns own employees in the rest of the presentation. You can also note the last point bullet point on the right there, that the CSRD also contains third-party assurance requirements. That is a new requirement which is not mandatory today, but for the CSRD reporting, you will need to have third-party assurance of the reporting to make sure that the reporting is correct and is done in accordance with the regulation. So I mentioned double materiality a couple of times, and this is a little bit complicated, but it's important for you to understand in order for you to also understand what kind of requirements will apply to your business and what kind of requirements related to HR will you have to comply with. So in the CSRD, the CSRD rests on a kind of, you can say it rests on a double materiality assessment. Every company subject to the CSRD has to undertake a double materiality assessment. And the purpose of that is to determine what topics are most material to this business when it comes to environment, social, and governance. This is it's a quite big process, and it has to involve all parts of the business because it looks across the business on impacts both from climate change, from sustainability topics on the business, and also the kind of impact that the business has on its surroundings. So the concept of double materiality is, as the name suggests, it's twofold. You have to look at impacts from two angles. The first angle is to look at the financial materiality. That is, you have to look at how different sustainability topics affect risks and opportunities on the company. So how, for instance, does climate change affect the company and the company value? So that is a financial assessment. On the other hand, you're looking at what kind of impact does our business have on sustainability topics, on planet and society, which is, basically what we're talking about. And that is to see, in our operations and in our value chains, what do we do? How does what we do impact planet and society? How does it impact on these environmental topics? How does it impact on these social topics? How does it impact the governance topics? So, for instance, here is where you look at how does our operations impact the working conditions of our own employees, or the working conditions of employees in the value chain. So the rest of the reporting kind of rests on this, because the topics that you consider material based on this assessment, which is a kind of thorough process, those are the topics that determine what you have to report on. So if you determine that your own employees' own workforce is a material topic to you, or the subtopics under that standard are material to you, then you have to report on those requirements in the ESRS. So if I can find that. So I won't go through this flow chart in detail, but this is just to illustrate the process for you when it comes to understanding what are the requirements that we have to respond to. So the first thing you have to do this double materiality assessment to understand what are the material topics. If the topic is considered not material to the business, then you don't have to report on it. That is the basic rule. If the topic is material, then you have to go into do some more analysis on those topics to see what are the reporting requirements that are material to us. And I will show you what that means, what those requirements are when it comes to your own workforce, and which are the most relevant to the HR function. This flowchart is taken from the ESRS standards. I can also say that if you want to look into those standards, they are not very accessible, I would say. It's a PDF document where you have to really run through it all, and this one is hidden somewhere in it. So it can be a bit overwhelming to understand. But this flowchart is taken from the ESRS 2 appendix if you want to look deeper into it. Some technicalities about the implementation plan. So for the CSRD, as I mentioned, it is already in force, and all member states in the EU should take the necessary amendments to national law and implement the directive by July next year. In Norway, it's the Securities Law Commission who has the mandate to consider the implementation of CSRD in Norwegian legislation, but the signals as from now is that it will follow the same timeline as in the EU. So for 2024, there are some listed companies, large companies, who have the first deadline for reporting on the CSRD requirements. But most companies will be affected by this in 2020 for FY 2025 and FY 2026 for their reporting. So you can find the details in this one. I won't go through them in detail, but you can return to this slide also if you have. I can distribute the slides afterwards, and you can return to that if you have specific questions about the timeline. There's an approximate number of 50,000 companies in the EU who will be affected by the CSRD. So pretty much, so a lot of companies will be affected by this, and also it would set the standard for what is expected also of other companies. In Norway, there is a current discussion on the threshold values of this, which is not necessarily landed yet, but for those of you who are in Norway, you will and there will be updates on that during this fall are expected. So what are the most important changes when it comes to the CSRD? We already have requirements in the EU from the NFRD, Non-Financial Reporting Directive. And in Norway, we have requirements in the Regnskapsloven, which says that which sets some requirements on sustainability reporting. The main differences is that the scale of the mandatory reporting is a lot bigger now than it has been before. And the requirements are also a lot more detailed. And in addition to that, the report has to be verified, or as I said, it needs to have third-party assurance, and that is also a new element to this law, which hasn't been there for sustainability reporting earlier. So, what are the most relevant requirements for the HR function? I've chosen to focus on this, the ESRS S1 reporting standard, which concerns own workforce. There are some elements in the other standards as well that might be relevant, for instance, on incentive structures, etc. But I will, and also on workers in the value chain and impacts on local communities. But I will focus now on the own workforce part. And as you can see, the standards consists of a lot of disclosure requirements that are detailed in the ESRS S1. There are basically, and very simplified, you can say there are two categories of reporting requirements. The first ones are the general disclosures. Or the general disclosures and disclosures related to policies and processes on opportunities, risks, and impacts. Those are mainly qualitative descriptions where you describe what kind of policies you have in place related to your own workforce, processes for engaging with workers and workers' employees, processes to remediate negative impacts on human rights, etc. So these are more qualitative. There is some guidance in the ESRS on how to do that, but it's basically, or generally, it's pretty much at this point up to the company on how they want to describe these policies. The second part is the more specific matrix and targets that you're supposed to report on. And for the structure of each ERS is the same. So this will look the same for the ESRS S2. It would look the same for the ESRS E1 on environment, etc. That you have these categories of reporting requirements. And on the metrics and targets, this is the specific KPIs and metrics that you're supposed to report on your own workforce if this topic is considered material based on your materiality assessment. So some examples of that. S16, these are the numbers that are just the reporting criteria number. S16, characteristics of the undertaking's employees. This is where you list the number of employees, breakdown by gender, country, type of employment, that is if it's full-time, part-time, or temporary employment. Turnover rates and how, and the description of how you compile these data. and some other requirements as well. This is just a selection of data points that you're supposed to fill in. S18, collective bargaining coverage and social dialogue. This is where you disclose the percentage of employees covered by collective bargaining agreements, and if your employees are not covered by such agreement, there is a more qualitative statement on how you ensure that their rights are upheld. Diversity metrics, gender distribution at top management, age distribution of employees, training skills and development, percentage of training of employees who have participated in training, and breakdown by gender. And remuneration metrics. Sorry, I see there are a few grammars here. Remuneration metrics, in which you're supposed to disclose the percentage gap in pay between male and female employees and the ratio between highest paid individual and median remuneration. So as you can see, these are very specific reporting requirements that you should note. And of course, they based on this, you will see that they require that you have good data and that you have good data quality and that you have a good data management. And I will get back to that. For those of you who are in Norway, and I'm sure that applies to the other participants from other countries as well, you will see that some of these requirements are quite attached to other legal requirements that you already have or that you already are supposed to have data or where you report your data. So for instance, the ARP, the Aktivitets- og redegjørelsesplikten in Norway, it includes a lot of reporting requirements when it comes to, for instance, pay gap. And we also had the Arbeidsmiljøloven, which is the employment law in Norway, which states what systems you need to have in place to ensure working conditions are good, etc. So maybe this will also give you some comfort that, you know, some of the specific reporting requirements in the ESRS and in the CSRD are quite closely linked to other regulations, and hopefully you might have systems already in place to have an overview of those data or to collect those data. So then I wanted to convey some key messages for you here towards the end, because this is the CSRD is quite overwhelming, and it's a part of a big regulatory wave coming in. And the purpose, of course, of the regulatory wave is not only regulation for the sake of regulation, it is for a bigger purpose. And my first key message, if it wants to, is this. The CSRD and equally all the other reporting requirements coming from the EU as part of the Green Deal is not about reporting, it's about change. So the reason why we have these reporting requirements and the reason why we have all these regulations coming in is because it is crucial in speeding up the green transition. It is crucial in order to reach the sustainability or the kind of transformational society that we need to become climate neutral. So if you also treat it as that in your company, to see this not as a compliance exercise, not as a reporting exercise, but actually use it as a recipe to see, you know, if we want to succeed in the green transition, if we want to be a company of the future and for the future, this is what it takes. These are the things that we need to manage. These are the things that we need to be in control of. So if you use the CSRD as it's very detailed, but that means it also gives you some details on what is the best practices or what are the necessary requirements to succeed in this transformation. And remember that the purpose of all these regulations is to turn the inflow, the economic flows or the investments in society towards business that is sustainable. So this will be a driving force also for investments and also for all activities that your business does. So you have to incorporate this in your strategies, in your operation models, and the CSRD will give you many good, or it will give you guidance on how to do that. So treat this as an opportunity, not as a burden. And those who do that and those who succeed in that will also be the companies who succeed in the future. So that is key message number 1. Mike, this is actually, connected to the key message number 1 is also that, there are big business opportunities in being socially sustainable. And if you incorporate this into your business strategies, that will also obviously bring opportunities for value creation. And there are some, I won't go through all this list of all the good things that can come out of that, but I'm sure you as HR people will understand also that being a front runner in these topics will also improve your business strategy and value creation. So key message number 2, get your data right. And this is extremely important, because when you see the number and the scale and the scope of all these reporting requirements and the metrics and the targets that you're supposed to report on, you will need a large amount of data, and you will need systems that enable you to manage these data, to collect the data, to analyze the data in an efficient way. And the status today, I would say, is that for the financial information, many companies are well set in collecting these data, in analyzing them, and using them in their daily operations. There are many automated controls. The numbers are audited. The data are often transactional, which means that they're easy to trace, to track, and to monitor. Whereas when it comes to sustainability information in general, but also HR-related information specifically, we see that there's a whole different picture. So what we see in businesses is very often that you have, these are not inside the ERP system, they're all often data that are outside somewhere, in numerous systems or not in the system at all. There are limited controls, and those controls that are in place are often manual. There's a huge amount of manual work to either collect or to analyze and to keep track of these data. And the problem with that is, there are many problems with that, but one is that it takes so much time just to collect the data that when you're ready to report on them, they're already outdated. There is also a lack of external scrutiny, so there are few incentives to ensure that the data quality is sufficient. All of this will change. So if you want to prepare for the reporting requirements, you need to make sure that you have that you know which data you need to have, and that you have good systems in place to collect and to analyze those data. And when I say systems, that is not only the technical systems, but it's the organizational systems, the routines and the policies and the processes on collecting them that are really, really important. Key message number 3. HR is a crucial function in this transition process towards a greener economy, and you should take your seat in that. And the reason why I say that is because when we work with clients on these topics, the HR function is often placed a bit on the side, or it might not be involved in these core processes for instance, in the double materiality assessment or in outlining the strategy for the future with the sustainability focus. So my message to you is to make sure that you are involved and that you take your seat as a core member of this process, because it's a change process, and it requires your competence and your responsibilities in it. And there are several reasons for that. One is that, of course, the HR function manages and owns a lot of key data that gives insights about the business. And that might be data that you need to report on, as I've gone through, but these are also data that are really, really important as input to the double materiality assessment. Because in order to understand if a topic is material, you need to have sufficient data to understand that. Also, the HR function has unique competence when it comes to both the holistic view of the business, you can see across the business. You have competence on business transformation and change management, which is at the core of this transition process. And you also kind of manage the competence structures and the competence values of the business. And if this transition will require a lot of competence in top management and amongst the employees when it comes to ensuring a green transition. And we see in our clients that how you organize these processes it differs a lot. So sometimes the HR function is very closely involved, others almost not at all. What we see is that it's quite it depends on individuals who takes the lead in these processes. Sometimes it's the CFO, sometimes it's the Chief Sustainability Officer, sometimes, depending on what kind of business it is, it's the procurement function that is in lead in some of these processes. But this really needs to be an integrated and a holistic approach across the company, and HR has an important place in that. And I think that was, so this is just a roadmap, but I see that time is running out. So in order for us to have a time for questions, I will leave it here. This is a generic slide showing a proposed roadmap towards compliance with the CSRD, but you can look more into that when I share the presentation later. So that was all on my agenda. Thank you, and I'm curious to see your questions.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was a really, really good presentation going into a complex topic. But I think you're able to simplify it so we can actually get an understanding of what it is and where to start, and more importantly, HR's role and in the whole situation of CSRD. We have a few questions that's been coming in here, so let's take a look. And lots of clapping hands here, so I think they really enjoyed your presentation, Christina. Well done.
Thank you.
Right, so let's start at the bottom here. All right. Okay, so we have a question around the documentation on the AFRAG website. So, I mean, we have also experienced that it can be challenging to find good documentation on what is really the requirements. So it's the person has said that he can find documents that are labeled as drafts. Is that really what's the going document, the document that's supposed to be the standard now for the first group of companies who have to report on the CSRD, or is there actually one that's a final version?
Yeah, I can just say I share that confusion and frustration on where to find accessible information on this. My go-to document is the PDF that you can find on EFRAG's pages, and that is also labeled the draft, as you could see from my slide. The ESRS standards, they call it the first final draft, I think. But they are adopted by the Commission, and this week the deadline for objections from the Parliament was reached. So now they have entered into what you call the rättskraftig, like they are valid from now on. So I have not found a version where it does not say draft yet, but you could, I would say, you can safely say take the draft version that you can find. I can see if I can send you a link to the one that I use, Hope, and that you might distribute.
That's great. Thank you.
As the starting point for understanding these requirements. Yes.
Very good. Thank you. There's also a question here with regards to the requirements for targets. So is this directive only reporting requirements per se, or do you also have to report on your target setting and your improvement over time?
Mm-hmm. Yes, for some topics, you are also supposed to set targets and report on improvement over time. So as if you remember the slide I had on the content of each ESRS, then there are these qualitative statements, and then there are metrics and targets. For some of those topics, it's only metrics. For some of them, there are also target setting involved in that you should set targets and then report on your development on those. So it differs a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. And here's a fairly specific one. Let's see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the ESRS 1 through 9 is mandatory reporting for companies with 250 employees or more. Does that mean that the rest depends on the materiality analysis?
Sorry, I hope I lost the first part of your sentence because your audio fell out. But I think the question was how much of this is mandatory and how much
Correct.
Depends on the materiality assessment. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's and there has been a change to that, because the first drafts that were so the discussion law, if we just 1 year back, there were a lot of these requirements were mandatory. This was changed during the spring and the summer. So now the only thing that is mandatory for all are the ESRS 1, which is I don't think there are many reporting requirements. That's more the principles, and the ESRS 2. So those are the general disclosures that you have to provide. Those apply to all. All the other subjects are subject to materiality assessments. So you have to do this double materiality assessment, and all the other subjects can be determined depending on the result of that materiality assessment. For climate emissions, there is a specific requirement that if you assess that as non-material, you need to provide a basis for that, because they, the assumption is that will be material for most companies, and that is also at the core, of the final aim. I would also say,
just a quick question. So just jumping in here. So we were talking a lot about materiality and what's material and what's not to each company. And by that, what you mean is what's relevant or not to each company, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you could say, because what is material to you is also what is relevant as a reporting criteria. But just remember that relevance is not only about how affected you are, but also how you affect your surroundings. So that is the double part of the materiality assessment.
Right.
Because, you know, traditionally you would, if you look at risks or opportunities, you would normally have an inward looking, like you start from the business perspective and you see what are the risks to the business or what are the opportunities for the business. But in the double materiality assessment, you also look out and you see how do we affect our surroundings. I also wanted to add to that the question on materiality, that it has not been very clearly defined, you know, when do you say that a topic is material? What are the thresholds for determining whether a topic is material or not? And I know there are different ways of approaching this and different methodologies. There is a guidance out there, but still there is a lot of, you know, trying and failing and finding that. So there is not a definitive answer as of yet as to when do you say that that a topic is material or not. I would say, you know, from my perspective, if you are a business with a certain number of employees, then own workforce would be a material topic, or I would be surprised if it's not. But there is no such, you know, you can't say there's a rule of thumb or that there's a general, you know, rule saying that it always will be. So this is a bit unclear. But that also means that it's that businesses have an opportunity to approach this in the way that they find more suitable to themselves.
Yeah, and I think you say it's not always very clear, you know, the boundaries between, you know, whether it's material or not, but also with regards to another question here, how you're supposed to be reporting on these different data points, because they haven't said much about that yet, have they? But the
format,
the
you
format.
mean, of the reporting?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Not much on the format, but it has to be in the letter, so that I always forget because I have it in the presentation. So let me find it. So the format has to be ESEF. It has to be in ESEF format. That is a specific format for you to upload the kind of data. But it can be in there is no set, you know, file format or other than that. And there is no portal that you know, state this in. You can report it in PDF, for instance, as a part of your annual report. And there are different. It will be very interesting to see how companies choose to report on this. Some will probably follow the kind of GRI structure, where you have a list of a table at the end of the report saying, you know, this requirement is answered in this part of the report, etc. But I also think that it might be a good thing to compile the topics all together. You say, if you want to report on our own workforce, then that is one part of your report, etc. Just because the requirements are so comprehensive. So that'll be interesting to see the structure and the format of the reporting that the businesses choose to use.
Moving a little bit on from reporting, we have a question here about competencies and how do you measure and report on competencies. Do you have any insight on that?
If you're talking about the specific requirements that I referred to, then training and competence is more about that. That is broken into the percentage of employees who have attended training, the number of training hours, broken down by gender, etc. So those are quite specific. When it comes to the larger picture, what competence do you actually need in the organization to be able to, you know, to comply with these requirements and also to use them in a good way for the business? I think that is an assessment that needs to be done by each and every company to understand where are we at this point and what do we need in order to be at the forefront of this. And I think that is also an area where the HR function is crucial, of course. I'm not sure if it specifically answered your question, but yeah.
I think it did. I see time is running.
Okay,
but we have, let's just do one final question, so which I think many is probably wondering about, but you were talking about third-party verification. So who can act as that third party to do that kind of verification?
Yeah, I know at least the auditor can. Whether others also can, I must admit I am not fully sure of, but that will be an important role for the auditor going forward, and they are very much on this agenda. And I have a lot of colleagues in our auditing department as well who are very who have excellence in this and who are preparing to do those assurances.
Great. So turn to your auditor and then they will be able to help you out. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that was the final question that we had time for. It's 11 o'clock, time has run out. Before we go, I really want to thank you, Christina, for sharing your insight with us today. And obviously, I want to thank all of you who logged on to listen to this. This is something that we will share lots more information about going forward. It's a topic that we in Catalyst On will continue to dive into and share as much as we can over the coming months. If you haven't already noticed, there's a link to an ebook on CSRD available for download on your screen.
And then I will just say thank you to all of you again, and have a nice day.